Gloves Off with David Singer. Today I have a very special guest, Rebecca Fishman Lipsey.
Got it.
I've had a hard time saying that all day, and I've been practicing and practicing. I don't know. Lipsey.
I do it just to mess with you.
I think so. It must be the pressure. She is. I'll let you introduce yourself. Actually, Miami Foundation.
Yeah, I'm the president and CEO of the Miami Foundation. It's our community's foundation, a philanthropic institution focused on strengthening Miami. I've been there since the middle of COVID.
You started April 2020. Well, before we start with the foundation, I'm going to give you some softballs, and I'm going to have you tell everybody your history, because your history is pretty unusual. As far as your schooling, you went to University of Pennsylvania.
I sure did. Hurrah!
And then you got your master's degree
in education. Yeah, I started out as a teacher.
A teacher in Harlem, which is very interesting because my grandmother, believe it or not, was a teacher in Harlem.
Okay.
Right? I'm reading this. I'm going, damn, my grandmother was a teacher in Harlem. That must have been tough, right? In like I guess it was the 50s, 40s and 50s, she was a teacher in Harlem.
That's beautiful.
So,
it was an incredible experience to be a teacher out there. I'm still in touch with a lot of my kids who are now grown-ups with their own master's degrees. But yeah, that was how I cut my teeth, was teaching.
That's great. That's great. And you have 2 children?
I do. I got 2 little boys.
You want to give them a shout out or say how old they are?
Yeah. So I've got a 10-year-old. He's in 4th grade. Andrew refers to himself as King A. And I have a 7-year-old, Noah. They're delicious and hilarious, and they keep me working on my toes.
And you can say hello to your husband out there.
And my husband, Jay.
And your husband. And they're all working. I just found out they're all working from their house.
We're
for the last year.
Yeah. I know we've had to be a little bit extra cautious because of some immune issues. And so our family has really bundled up over these last few months, year at this point. So within our home, we have 2 adults working, 2 kids schooling, and I am just looking for the light at the end of the tunnel.
And probably a drink.
You know, I have to say, though, I've never had the chance because I've had such a career that really fulfills me, but often it leads to late nights and long days. And so having dinner with my kids and my husband every night is a new ritual from COVID, and I'm not letting go. It has been so beautiful and important.
Yeah, it's interesting because, now families are getting back to the table where they sit around and all the family, usually everybody's running in a different direction. And if they show up for dinner, they show up for dinner. If not, they can get it out of the refrigerator. It's kind of changed.
Yeah,
kind of changed really.
I'm grateful for it. I guess there have been some important silver linings this past year, and and I'm grateful that I like my kids because I see them all day long.
Okay, and you were on the Florida Board of Education for 4 years.
Yes,
you were the youngest individual.
Poorest. Yes.
Youngest and poorest.
A joke. Yeah, no, it's a 7-person board responsible for policy for the entire education system, kindergarten through college. And we have a really robust college system here in Florida. And when I was working in public school, and then as I led a nonprofit focused on education, I looked to see who was making the laws that we then were inheriting in our school system. And I was really passionate about educational equity. And I saw that there had not been a teacher, and especially a teacher who was working in a low-income school, that's voice was at that table. And so I wanted there to be somebody there, and I ended up being that somebody. Was
that an appointed position, or did you have to run a campaign for that?
Well, I had to campaign for that, but it was an appointed position.
But there was no really election. It was
okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's a vote of one, but you have to get
don't confuse me with facts, okay?
It's an appointed position.
You're also executive director of Teach for America?
I was, yeah. So that's how I found my way into teaching. I was recruited by Teach for America, and they trained me and really helped me learn about educational equity and how, based on your zip code, the quality of education you'll receive in public school across this country is dramatically different. And I was so passionate about what I saw and experienced when I was in the classroom that I went on, joined staff, and that's how I ended up in Miami. Was Teach for America sent me down here to be the executive director.
You were born and raised in Miami?
I was not.
You were not, okay.
I grew up in the Northeast. I taught in the Northeast. And then
No wonder you have such a great education. Just joking,
Stop
guys.
it. We have great schools here.
Just joking, guys.
Yeah, but that's how I ended up here, and I fell in love with Florida, and it has become home.
That's great. So what were your responsibilities for, as the director for Teacher for America?
Yeah, so our mandate was focused on educational equity, so helping students who were in schools that historically have really struggled, and to be there for at least 2 years, focused on closing the achievement gap facing kids. And so we would recruit and then train and then support for those 2 years teachers who were placed in rural and urban schools, typically schools that were failing or had a long history of low performance. And so, I have done a lot of interviews and training and support for a great network of teachers. And then after the 2-year commitment, the focus was helping that group of leaders who had this really formative experience in the classroom to continue either in the school system or outside, pushing for education reform.
What were your responsibilities? Because this is all new territory for me. Although I got to tell you, what I do on my show, what I've been doing on my show for the past 4 months is I do interviews with nonprofits, which I really enjoy. I mean, that is, to me, is my bread and butter. But I also bring politicians on to talk about what's happening in Dade County and, the trials and tribulations of a city or a county as large as growing as fast as we've grown. Because I was born here and raised here. I was born in 62, 61, 62. I'm not sure which year it was. It was actually December 23rd. So I consider myself being born in 62 instead of 61. It makes me feel a little younger.
Great.
And, with probably about 500,000 people in Miami versus where we're probably 2.5 million now, somewhere in that range. So it's really grown up and been a lot larger than it is now. So, and I lost the track
you
of
were
what my
going to
thought
dig
was.
in a bit to understand Teach for America.
Yes, Teacher of America.
Yeah, so, let's start with the problem,
Mhm.
okay? So if you're a third grader in this country, and you're living in a low-income community, typically you're reading on a first grade level. And so when I taught 4th grade in Harlem, I had students who had been there, kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade. They're now in 4th grade, and they were reading on a kindergarten to 1st grade level. It was not because they weren't capable. It was because they were being filtered through a system that was failing them. And so the question is, how do you solve for that? That is happening. There are so many factors that are leading into that. How do you solve for a system level issue like that? And the theory of Teach for America is we need to get promising talent across this country. We need to get them to be excited about that issue and to get them for at least a couple years to be a part of the solution early in their careers. Let's bring people in, so they recruited me in college and said, whatever it is you thought you were going to do right out of college, don't do that. Start in the classroom and give 2 years of your life in service, teach and fight like crazy to help your kids catch up to grade level, build relationships with their families and with the community, and see what happens in your career after that. Let's just see what happens. And what ends up happening is you get someone who's fired up, who's passionate, who's talented. You place them in a classroom, and it's their job to fix a huge issue, and they become obsessed with that issue. And so they got me. If I thought I was going to be a lawyer or a performer or who knows, they got me for decades of my life, obsessed with educational equity. And then serving on a state school board, and many of my colleagues who served with me went on to become administrators of schools or founders of networks of schools, or working in policy or still teaching in classrooms. And so that's the mission of the organization. So my job back then, I was running a nonprofit that was finding those outstanding individuals and then helping them to be great in the classroom and then to continue being great for that issue after the classroom.
So what do you make of the disparity between the fact that, a 3rd grader is reading in 1st grade level and not reading on a 3rd grade level? You always, I always hear that teachers are teaching towards tests and not necessarily teaching what needs to be done to get the kids to be more motivated what I mean, I'm an outsider, so you hear the buzzwords, right? Yeah. You don't really hear about the minutia. What the problem is, you hear the buzzwords. Oh, well, they spend, a quarter of the year teaching towards the exam because the schools need the funding, and if they don't get A or B as far as the exams, they're not going to get the funding. And it's what do you make of all that?
Yeah, I mean, it's so complex. I'll give you like an answer in a nutshell, but it's really complex. And I'll get to the testing part of it in a second. But just to think about what's going on for students who are growing up in a low-income community, in a low-income household, and they are facing tremendous pressures. There's a lot of food insecurity and housing insecurity and job insecurity within their families. And, for many of my students, they struggle to find a quiet space to do their work. And they had additional pressures that they were facing. And then they would come and bring that with them into the classroom. Often there were resource challenges in the classroom, and it was a more challenging environment with which to teach. And so the struggle to find and retain great teachers there, as opposed to them wanting to go to another either better resourced or potentially easier environment with which to work. And all of the disadvantages that are stacked up against students, what ends up happening is sometimes you lower the bar for kids. And as you lower the bar, students reach for whatever bar you're setting for them. And so as you lower it, you think you're doing a student a favor by lowering the bar, but actually you're lowering their potential, their capacity. And so, what's really important is to make sure that we're paying attention to whether kids are learning or not, and also that we're keeping a really high bar for them and making sure they have really high quality principals, really high quality teachers. And so in terms of the tests, like it's a challenge gone wrong, without a test, what ends up happening is there may be entire neighborhoods or entire schools where kids are just not learning, and you have no way of intervening because you have no idea that that's even happening. And so the idea of rolling out tests across a state or across a country would be like, we need to pay attention to whether kids are learning or not and figure out where they are and what's working, and then figure out where they're not and do something to fix it. And then you've created a test, and it's kind of norming, you may have an A and I may have an A in different schools with different tests, but let's give everybody the same test so that we can see and compare and make sure that you're getting the same quality education as me. So the intention in there is so good and so important. And without that information, we're blind. But what happens then when you have that test and there's so much pressure on teachers because they don't want to look like they're not doing a good job? And so a lot of pressure then comes on schools to make sure, and the test becomes the center as opposed to just a benchmark to determine where extra help is needed.
Well, if I understand this correctly, the test is fine. It's the fact that it's kind of like it's tied to financial gain. And that's where the problem is, because they all feel the pressure that if they don't sit there and teach to the test, that there's going to be ramifications down the road where they lose funding.
Yeah, I mean, there are ramifications for the students if they don't perform. So, you can end up getting held back or going to summer school. Or for students who are struggling in reading, they may get kind of a double dose of reading. So they'll lose a special, like an art opportunity or something else that might fuel them because they're getting an extra dose of the thing where they're struggling. So for students, they feel a tremendous pressure. For the teachers, they feel a pressure as well about the consequence for their own job and whether they'll get, kind of strong performance at the end of the year for their work. The schools feel that pressure. For the evaluation they'll get and the interventions that will come from the district or from the state. And so it becomes, even though it wasn't the intention, it becomes a very high pressured situation. But it's a double-edged sword, because if you don't have that test, then you don't know how kids are doing.
But it sounds like you need the test, but you don't need the negative connotations that come with the test.
Possibly. And so what are the connotations? What are the consequences afterwards? And also, like, how frequently are you testing? And, is it for every subject? Is it every year? Like, are there interim tests to see whether they're going to be ready for the real tests? And so what ends up happening is, like, we don't want to wait until the end of the year to find out kids aren't performing. So let's give a test each semester, and then we're going to give mini tests on the way there. And then there's ways you can prep for tests. And so then instead of learning, you end up doing test prep. I mean, if you studied for the SATs or had kids study for the SATs, like, there's tricks to teach kids how to perform better on a test. So where do you spend your time? Are you going to prep kids for the test where they'll look higher performing, or are you going to teach them to love learning?
Yeah, because it seems to me if you're sitting there studying for tests all the time and really you get away from the joy of learning. Yeah. Right? If I had to sit there and study for a test constantly, even in college, I couldn't sit there and sit back and enjoy learning what I wanted to learn and things that I was interested in. So it kind of like it's more than a double-edged sword. It seems like almost like a penalty at some point, because you want kids to advance with things that they're interested in, right? And if they're always sitting there studying for this test, they're not going to find, whether it's science or it's math or it's English, they're not going to be able to focus on what they really like to do.
Yeah.
Am I somewhat stating
Yeah,
and eloquently
you speak
what
for other
the
people as
issue
well.
what the issue is?
And making sure that every kid who comes to a school, like they are able to find their passion, their skill, their strength, and dive into that, and not just feel all day like they're struggling and being held to just a very narrow set of criteria for what makes them.
It almost sounds like
strong.
a mouse maze, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I hate to describe it as that, but it's almost like, instead of just some open box where they go where they want to go, and it's beneficial
Yeah.
in the long run.
There is a way to get it right.
Yeah.
And so, I think there's really good intentions behind it, and figuring out how to implement it right, I think is the challenge.
They probably just need to adjust it somewhat and see what has happened that's positive and what has happened that's negative, and try to adjust instead of following the same track.
Yeah.
Because the same track is easy to follow.
Yeah. We used to say fewer, better tests. And I think similarly, what are the consequences, and having fewer, better consequences.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about your present position that you took over in April of 2020, the Miami Foundation.
Yeah.
Which, believe it or not, I've lived here my whole life, and it was actually the first time that I actually heard the name Miami Foundation, and they've been around since 67, which is 50 years. You think that I would have heard something about it, but I guess they hide in the shadows, right? I worked for the Knight Foundation for a couple of years, which was pretty interesting.
Oh, wow.
And I had a great time.
What'd you do over there?
I would do the controller.
Cool.
Yeah.
Just a little job.
I'm a CPA, or was a CPA.
Very cool.
So yeah, it was very interesting to see how it all works.
Yeah.
Foundations
work. I'm so excited to help you now fall in love with the Miami
Foundation. And we'll have to give a shout out to Yolanda Berkowitz, who introduced me to you. Thank you, Yolanda, so you could be on the show. So you came in during COVID. Nothing was like it was previous. What did you get slapped with when you first walked in the door?
Such a good question. So, rewind. What is this institution that I inherited? And then this past year.
Oh, wait. Let's before we do that, why don't we talk about what the Miami Foundation is?
You got it.
Okay.
So, in many communities around this country, there is a community-based foundation. People tuning in probably are familiar with what a foundation is, and we, bring in resources. We give out resources to the community. The purpose is to be a backbone for the community, for philanthropy, for leadership, and for civic engagement. And so, anytime there is a critical need in the community, who is gathering or rallying the community to give and to solve, and then who's building the resource for the long term to protect the needs of the community. So that's our responsibility. Our responsibility is to identify the issues that matter most to Miami now and to Miami in the future, and to raise the philanthropic muscle necessary to address those issues in a serious way, and to bring together elected leaders, nonprofits, for-profits, to have solutions to issues that matter. So this year, in the face of COVID, if we could just think about all of the issues that mattered, we needed to raise funds to sustain nonprofits. Nonprofits were bleeding this past year across every issue area, food insecurity, domestic violence, mental health, housing, across every issue area, the need was multiplied. And so we ran our community's nonprofit recovery fund to make sure all the organizations addressing needs in our community were safe and stable. And so that when we get to the other side of COVID, they're still here and strong. And so that's one thing. And then we looked around to see what other issues are critical right now. We saw internet access was a huge need. And so we're rallying the community to provide internet access to every single child.
Yeah, we're going to get to that, because I was shocked to find out that 25% of the homes in Miami-Dade County, I guess it is, doesn't have internet access. So we'll get to that.
Okay, cool.
But keep
another thing,
keep flying.
It is. I will. So, this year was just like continuous punches in the face. I think our country had a racial justice awakening this past year. We stared in the face at several very painful moments of deep injustice, systemic injustice. And so our community foundation said, we're putting a flag on the floor, and we are saying, our community is going to get this right. We're going to raise funds for racial equity, and we're going to invest in leaders and organizations that are making Miami more equitable racially. And so with every moment that we, whether it's hurricane recovery or a census turnout, we will identify issues that matter, sea level rise, and say, what is it going to take to solve this issue? Let us mobilize. We'll raise the money necessary. We'll build a strategic plan for our community, and we'll implement and give.
So all businesses have a business plan, right? So all nonprofits have what their plan is or their stated goals. Has since COVID hit changed your goals from what they were in '67 to where they are now? I know technology's changed, so it would seem that right there it would change your goals. But they all set up this goals, and you walk in and you see the goals on the wall when you walk in, and everybody knows what direction they're heading. And it sounds like since COVID, the Miami Foundation's tweaked their goals a little.
So that's an interesting question. So I would say like the universe of philanthropy has changed over time a bit, and COVID was a good shaking for the philanthropic community, because a lot of times what you'll see happen in philanthropy is there's thousands of people who are generous and who are giving, but they do it by themselves. You'll care about something, you'll cut some checks to organizations you care about, I'll care about things, I'll cut checks, but I don't know where you're giving, you don't know where I'm giving, and we're not looking at the whole to see whether all of the issues that need to be taken care of are being taken care of. It's kind of like problem solving whack-a-mole. Like I'm doing this over here, and everybody is in a silo. And in the face of a crisis like this, we needed to just step back for a second and say, okay, like our community is in crisis. This is going on for way longer than anyone anticipated. We need to make sure everyone who's giving they're talking to each other, and that we have a coherent and thoughtful plan. And so it led all the philanthropic institutions to talk to each other more regularly, to plan with each other, and for us to think less about individual grants that we cut and more about issue areas where we take a stand.
Okay, so it did change then.
Yeah.
It's because you were basically, I guess, attacking it I don't want to say single-minded, but I will, single-mindedly, and now it's more of a holistic approach to where can I hit, and can we, I would assume that there's some sort of measurement that you all do to make sure that your money, I think, what I read, $350 million base fund, gets the most bang from its buck.
Yeah, I'll say one more thing that shifted a bit. So the way community foundations, the way the money flows, is that people build funds within our foundation to kind of grow their philanthropic savings and invest in the community over time. And then people endow our foundation, either to invest in issues that they care about, or they'll entrust us to determine what issues matter in the future. And so we have within our foundation 1,000 funds from different people in the community who care about different things, and those things lead to community grants that we can run each year. But this year, in a moment of crisis, we turned back to our fund holders and said, we know you normally give kind of wherever it is that you believe you should direct funds, but this year, like let us just put in front of you a handful of issues that really matter right now. You may want to join us. We see that you care about education. Like, look at what's happening in education. Join us to focus on this. Or you really care about racial equity. We see how you've been giving. Join us over here. And it's led us to leverage those relationships differently this year than ever before.
So I read that when COVID hit, you guys, let me make sure I'm checking my notes, 608 applications for $13.4 million in grants.
Yeah.
And you basically gave out $11.3 million in grants
in like a month and a half
for 423 applications. So where did the majority of that money go?
Children and youth services was huge.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really across every issue area. But I'd say housing was a huge crisis this year. So anyone who's providing services for those who are vulnerable to potentially becoming homeless, food access was a major crisis. So a lot of organizations that do youth and education programming, and they were all shifting to figure out how to help kids over the course of this year instead of in person, either online or in some other safe ways. They all had huge expenses to figure out how to take everything they did and turn it upside down. Arts organizations were bleeding this past year. They couldn't host any of the events that they normally would bring in revenue for them. And it was the question, are we going to furlough our entire teams? Or are we going to continue to create content for our community? And so really, I mean, every single issue area was represented.
So how did you, I'm sure you don't get that many applications in a whole year. How did you do that in a 90-day time frame, a 120-day time frame, a 30-day time frame? I mean, how did you turn on a dime to sit there and go, and was it individual grants for like an individual, or was it a mom and pop, or what was the breakup of those? Am I asking too many detailed questions?
No, it's fun. So
Yeah.
I'll say, so first of all, we do get that number of grant applications a year. We get hundreds upon hundreds of applications a year. We have lots of different grant cycles for different topics. And so many of the organizations, they know us, we have a relationship with them. We normally don't have the ability to give this much that quickly. But CARES Act funding came in, and we built a partnership with our county and said, we know you want to invest in nonprofits. You don't have the historic relationship with the organizations that we do. If you tried to run this program yourselves, it would take you a very long time to figure out how to run the grant application process, how to vet organizations, how to execute this. But this is our bread and butter. Let us be your partner. And so in partnership with the county, we built this nonprofit recovery program, and we built out a speedy team of both people internally at our foundation, and also we hired some external folks to just help us get up to speed quickly. And we reviewed, a beast, the number of applications people had to review every day. It was really high. And because we were trying to help mom and pop organizations too, not just big organizations, but specifically small organizations.
Yeah, I don't think people realize how many charities and nonprofits are out there.
Hundreds.
And it's pretty amazing how many people work to help other people.
It is. And I think, most people are familiar with larger organizations, but when you get down into neighborhoods, there are individuals who they know their community deeply. They may not have a fancy website that you can visit, but they are doing the work on the ground. And we wanted to make sure we could get them funds too. And so that takes a little bit more work on the processing side, because they may not know how to fill out a grant application, how to get all the paperwork in order and all the receipts that they need to prove how they're spending the money. And so we had to build a team that could help people. The customer service part of this was really significant. And we had to do it fast because those CARES Act, the dollars needed to be spent by the end of the year. And so we had to go fast.
So did you do any secondary review of how the money was? See, because it's easy to give money away.
It's not.
It's somewhat easier to give money away than it is to verify where the funds.
Yeah.
Where you're talking to an old auditor, you make sure that the funds were used for the intended purposes. So how did you do your checks and balances?
Yeah, we're doing them now. But we were very specific in the grant application about what the funds could be used for, and asked people in their application to list out what they were going to be using it for. So actually a lot of the back end work we did on the front end, and now we're verifying. And the way the funds flowed also was that you could use it as reimbursement for expenses from earlier that year during COVID. And so many people, as they were applying, were actually applying for money that they fronted during COVID to address community needs.
So how are you right now in this situation? Are you still receiving applications? Is it still
that one's closed.
Is it completely dire out there right now?
No.
Have you seen it get better since you walked in the front door?
So generosity is at a high.
Yeah.
In Miami right now. I think people even in a year where people financially were strained and scared, and the markets were down for some time, but people were more generous than ever. And the nonprofits, I think they are feeling real pain. We have gone way past the point of savings for nonprofits. You can lean on your savings for a month or two. We're well past that breaking point. And so the need continues to be really high. But on our end at a foundation, we've never seen more generosity from our community, and we're just trying to be really strategic about how we spend every dollar.
Okay, so you've gotten through the tough period, and now I would assume is your time to try to raise more money, right? Are you at that point?
I'm always raising money.
Are you? But wait, but you walked into a brush fire, right?
Yeah.
And it's really hard to pre-plan or think about the future when you're trying to put out all the fires.
Yeah.
So now you're at the point where I would assume that you're planning for the future.
Yeah. So we're planning, but we've identified a couple really critical issue areas. And so it's not generic fundraising. It's very specific issue focused fundraising right now. figuring out who in the community really cares about each of these issues and wants to stand with us to do some big solving. And so I would say like the long-term strategic planning, which I thought I would get to do during my first month on the job in this role, COVID kind of iced.
Yeah, I would figure that, right?
And so I think like that's coming for us. That's coming soon. And I'm excited to do that with my board and my team. And we've started to do some of the strategic planning exercises, but I think we are still in the mode of seeing the lessons from this past year and raising some money for some serious issue areas, Wi-Fi being one of them.
Okay. So I ran into a term that I'd never heard before, social impact acceleration.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, what exactly is that?
Yeah.
So I mean, you're gonna have to dumb it. You're gonna have to dumb it down for me.
Yeah. Okay. So you're familiar potentially with the concept of a for-profit accelerator.
Yes.
Okay. So super similar. So when you look across the country at how businesses are incubated and grow, there's these things called accelerators where you'll invest early in a company with a great idea, give them coaching and mentorship and support, and hope that they will make it big, and then you'll profit from having invested in them early. And they kind of do it in a cohort form, so they build relationships with each other. It becomes a family of sorts of growing companies. So 10 years ago in Miami, as our entrepreneurship ecosystem was building, I thought to myself, that's a cool model, the accelerator model. I wonder whether that would work for community change, like for social impact, for organizations that are doing something that solves a community issue. Can we incubate those, invest early in those, and help them grow? And then my profit at the end is not going to be money, it's going to be community impact. And so I launched this concept, a social impact accelerator, where we would do cohorts, pick 10 founders of ventures that are solving community issues, invest in them early, and help them work on their pitch, their fundraising strategy, their branding, their team growth, their executive skill, and then
their activism, which I thought I hit it. I go, activism, I like that.
Yeah. And so, a lot of organizations in town that we worked with now, they started with us. They were bringing in, no resources yet, not paying themselves yet, but they had a great idea. And now they're some of the most beloved organizations in town. And I think that that's the power of community and of supporting a leader.
You started at nonprofit though, right?
So I started on the nonprofit side.
No, but you started a nonprofit. You were the founder of that group that started the accelerator,
Radical Partners,
right? And you departed, but it's an ongoing operation. Ongoing operation.
Awesome work. I love that. That was like truly for me a dream to found something that I loved so much, and then to watch them continue to kick butt without me.
Are you still engaged with them at all?
I mean, so Joanne, who runs it right now, is a dear friend. I talk to her probably on a weekly basis. We were texting earlier today, but I have to let her do her thing too. So
yeah, you don't want to micromanage.
Hover.
Yeah, no. Nobody wants to micromanage.
No, but it's hers. It's her baby now.
Yeah.
And the team is awesome, and it's fun because at this point we have this group of alumni, over 100 founders that have come through the organization and are now they're doing incredible things in the community, and so many of them are now coaches for the accelerator on the other side, which is neat.
And who are do they work with other nonprofits or individuals? How does that all tie in together?
So they do cohorts. So identify 10 outstanding founders and bring them in, and they'll do, let's say a 12-week accelerator program. They'll do, boot camps or summits for different topic areas. So they'll do strategic planning summits with lots of nonprofits together, bring a bunch together to crank out their strategic plans. And then they run a handful of programs in the community too. Yeah,
nobody realizes how important strategic plans are. I mean, it's one of the most important. It's like it is literally in business. It's a business plan and then a strategic plan, and that really sets, the rules of engagement.
Yeah.
Up for where you need to get, where you should be, and where you need to go, and then you measure.
Yeah.
How influential you've been or profitable or.
But it can be a bit of a black hole for nonprofits, especially small ones that are struggling. They want to grow. They want to take the time to build out a plan, don't know how to do it. It seems daunting, think they need to hire an expensive consultant to coach them through it. And so the question we had at Radical Partners was, is there a way to do this really cheaply? Like bring people together and actually just facilitate for them, get it sponsored by corporations and other philanthropists, and help nonprofits build their strategic plan so that they don't have to either skip it because they can't afford it or dip into savings they don't have in order to do it.
No, it's almost like, you take a bunch of people out into the woods, right?
Yeah.
And you say, okay, we're going to do a strategic plan. Nothing's off the table. Let's see if we can all agree on where we want to be in 5 years.
Yeah.
Right. That's kind of like what happens. And that's just basically your business plan. And then you figure out how to measure it. I mean, I'm simplifying it, right? But it's still, your strategic plan, nothing should be off the table with a strategic plan.
Yeah.
If you think about it, I mean, and you have goals. So it's kind of interesting. There's some municipalities in South Dade, I think, should have like some better strategic plans, but that's just my personal feelings. So tell me about Miami Connected.
Yes. So we launched this week. I can't even believe that we finally launched. This has been a lot of time in the making. So we've hit the 1 year mark. Kids were sent home from school or told not to come back from spring break because of COVID. It wasn't safe. And the entire school system pivoted online. And the question is, what happens if you don't have high quality internet in your house? You can't go to school. You couldn't, all these businesses shifted online. You can't work from home. You can't apply for a job. Although you want to sign up for benefits during COVID, it was all online. You want to sign up for a COVID test or now a vaccine, it's all online. Everything shifted. Zoom became a household name. Weddings, funerals, it's all online. And there was a huge portion of our population, about 20% of our population, that doesn't have access at home to broadband internet. And so the school system, they
or laptops. Wait, not only broadband, let's
or laptops.
Or laptops or computers or anything else, or cellular phones, which you could actually, use too. So I mean, it's not just broadband. They didn't have enough ability to continue learning during COVID.
You got it totally right. And the school system, it shouldn't be their responsibility to provide a utility to the population and then to get computers for the population. But they stepped up and they got mobile hotspots and devices. But sometimes it was an iPad or something else. But then you have students at home. There's multiple kids trying to get on with the same hotspot and with devices that aren't sufficient. And even myself, with a really high quality internet connection at home, at least once a day, something drops. It's kids. Or
you're fighting over the band network, right? So you have 3 kids on there, and you have a slower speed, not as slow as a dial-up, but you have a slower speed, and you all are sitting there fighting over, your download and your upload speed.
Yeah, and so we looked at the community and thought to ourselves, like, this is where the future is headed. Educationally, this is where the future is headed professionally. If you want to have access to opportunity, you need high quality internet. You need a wire, you need broadband, you need high speed, and you need a device, and you need to know how to use it. And so we looked around the country and said, like, who is solving this? Who is solving this in a really systemic, thoughtful way? And we saw out in Chicago that there was something called Chicago Connected. They were raising money to help every single low-income student and their family get broadband internet at home. And we got on the phone with them. We learned about what they were doing. And our partners in this, so Achieve Miami is the organization that we're partnering so closely on this, had a relationship with the lead funder out there who just recently purchased a home here in Miami and was, has roots here in South Florida. And we asked the question, like, do you think they would be interested in helping us do this here? And they were. And so the lead funder out there in Chicago became the lead funder here, and we began trying to match that grant. And on Monday, we launched this effort in partnership with our mayors, our county mayor and the city of Miami mayor, and school system, and a handful of other funders, the Emerge Americas. I don't know if you're familiar with that tech conference, huge tech and innovation conference, Children's Trust. And we're going for it. We're starting first in Overtown. Every single family that's disconnected, we want to see connected. And then we're going to go down to Homestead, hopefully, and go neighborhood by neighborhood.
So how does that work? Are you getting discounts from AT&T or Comcast? Do they have to apply with an application? By the way, you said something where the future is, I'm hoping the future is not with kids learning from home.
No,
I'm literally, because there's no socialization, right?
Absolutely.
I understand the homework and everything else, but I think that the kids definitely need to be back in school. Mine was, I don't know about yours, but mine was in school for 2 weeks, out 1 week because somebody in class got tested positive out 3 weeks. And actually, if you want to know my feelings, it's probably more disruptive to have them in school, out of school, in school, out of school, in school. But in today's day and age, having internet in your house is definitely necessary.
Yeah.
For a bevy of reasons.
Yeah.
So explain to me how you guys are planning to make sure that your 25% goes down to 5%.
Yeah.
I mean, what's your
From
target?
your mouth to God's ears. So
Yeah.
our target is 100,000 kids, which is about 60,000 families. And, we're going to see as we begin implementing this, what the need is, what the uptake is, because we have some data, but in South Florida, it's tricky because we have a lot of undocumented kids and families and migrant workers. And so we're going to see whether there's greater need than we anticipated, or actually whether over the course of this year, more families signed up than we thought. And so we're gonna be in partnership with principals who know which kids are not showing up and which kids are not connected, and have relationships with families. And we're going to work as well with our housing authorities and go door to door with nonprofit partners to ask families, do you have access to broadband internet? And if not, here's how you sign up.
And the school board's been receptive?
Oh, they're an incredible partner. They're an incredible partner. The superintendent spoke at the launch and, has been cultivating partners. There's a handful, I think, is the Heat and TD Bank that were in a partnership with the school system, and they're now working with us. And we're going to make sure that, as we go into Overtown, we're working as a united front, the school system and us at the same time, bringing resources together and making sure that families get a really clean, simple sign-up process.
So they'll go in, they'll fill out the application. AT&T and Comcast, those are the only two I recognize right now.
Yeah.
Will give you some sort of discount, and you'll pay how will that all?
We pay it. So we're going to pay the bill for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And as we're doing that, we're also looking for kind of long-term solutions related to this. But we're doing, the lead partnership is with Comcast. They launched something called Internet Essentials, which is a very affordable internet. In some sense, affordable is a relative term. But it's $10 a month for a family to get access to broadband. And we negotiated a handful of things, 3 months at the beginning, and some additional perks for families in terms of the amount that they're able to use. It's a really, really strong program. And on our end, we're going to be signing families up, and then we pay the bill. And then families that sign up also get digital literacy. So got to learn how to use it. I want to sign up for that because I still have issues with digital literacy. I mean, it's no joke. I think all of us, I have to learn how to put the background on my filter and how to get, I'm using Microsoft Teams. I don't know how to use this program. And so, we are partnering with code.org, which is a national incredible organization that has a ton of content related to teaching kids and teaching families how to use what's online, and also thinking about safety. So we're giving access to the internet, but you have to use it, protect yourself while you're online. So it's a lot for us to teach. And what we saw across the country is that if you just give the internet and you don't give the digital literacy, you haven't gotten all the way in.
So I would assume that this is going to be available for families that are low income families that kind of prove that they're low income families. I don't know how all that works. And then you'll get them a basic package. But you're right. I never thought about protecting a child from predators if you give them access to. That's something that doesn't regularly come into somebody's mindset about,
and how to protect your personal information and your your passwords and other. There's a lot that we need to teach. I mean, it's very simple through the school system to identify Title I schools. So Title I schools are schools with a high volume of kids who are getting free and reduced lunch. And so if kids qualify and are attending a school and are getting free lunch, the vetting of need has been done. And so on our end, we're partnering with principals of schools where there's a high volume of need in that way, and then identifying students through there.
So what do you think is going to happen with the kids that have lost? I went through Hurricane Andrew.
Yeah.
So a lot of kids lost a lot of time in school.
Yeah,
I mean, just happened to be, from Homestead to Sunset. What do you think is going to happen with the kids that have lost that year? How do you think they're planning on getting them caught back up?
Yeah. So I'm even more concerned about the mental health issues and the kind of the trauma.
Well, that's coming out now. I mean, you read about that every day.
Yeah, I mean, we are going to see long-term consequences of kids who absorbed stress and fear this year and who have health concerns that we didn't grow up fearful of germs in the way that I think a lot of our kids now. Like, there's a lot that the schools are going to have to absorb as kids come back in and acclimate post-COVID. And then there's going to be kids who are really behind. I will say wholesale, probably almost everyone is going to be a little bit behind.
I'm definitely sure my son is behind.
I think if you ask any parent right now, they're really, really worried. And parents who are reaching out and trying to hire tutors to keep their kids up to whatever third grade level or fourth grade level was supposed to be. But we have to remember that the bar for everybody has shifted this year, and that every teacher who teaches second grade next year knows that their first grade students coming in, they had a COVID year. Every single teacher knows it. What becomes tricky is, and the whole world is experiencing this, but having high expectations for kids is really important. And so what do we do this upcoming year? Do we lower the curriculum and the expectations for every kid, or do we have there be a catch-up year that is more intense for each student? And I imagine each school is going to play it differently.
Or putting them in school an extra month of the year.
Yeah,
which I'm sure teachers don't want to hear about that. But I mean, if you need to do that, you need to do that, because that's the kids are our future, right? As they say.
Yeah, and then we're investing in their future right now. And when I think about what would I want if this happened to me when I was in 10th grade, what would I want? And I think there is going to be some loss as a result of this past year. And I think everyone around the globe is going to feel it. It's
going to be interesting when they start taking tests like the SAT or some, and what happens in 12th grade and beyond, because, colleges are very specific as far as what they want you to know and how you know it and how much you know. Yeah. You touched on something that's very interesting, and it's mental health issues, right? The United States has done a horrendous job with mental health issues, as far as I'm concerned. There needs to be more. Mental health is as important as physical health. I wonder how that's going to shake out.
Yeah.
In the future, as far as mental health.
Yeah, I agree. And I would say another area that I'm really concerned about is substance abuse. I think there are a handful of really silent pains right now in our community where the light has been shined on food insecurity, but there are, domestic violence, substance abuse, mental health. I would say what are often private pains in our community, that the level of need has been so high this year. I remember when I first got this job, and I was working from home, everyone's working from home, and it was so loud. And I had my first really important conference call. And so I was like, I'm going to leave my home. I have nowhere to go. So I'm going to go sit in the parking lot of my car. So I get in my car and I drive, a few blocks away to the largest parking lot that I assume is going to be empty so that I can get on this important call. And so it's the Total Wine and Spirits that I go to sit in the parking lot. And let me tell you, in the middle of COVID, this was April of last year, end of March of last year, I have never seen any place as hopping as the parking lot of Total Wine and Spirits. It was like everyone in my entire neighborhood must have been there to get their essential needs. And it made me deeply concerned about, and as I've watched what's unfolded and talked to people who run institutions that help people with substance abuse, the volume has been tremendously high this past year. And similarly, often the places people would go either to get therapy or support for mental health, there was a shift in access. I think we're going to see pain for our kids and for our grownups at the end of this year. And also parents of students with special needs, who I think the level of strain that they experienced this past year was really high.
I wonder if there's going to be a way to measure the effects in the future of what's happened in the past year.
Oh yeah.
And on top of that, we don't know if this is going to happen again.
Don't say it. Don't salt.
I mean,
salt.
Yeah, no, but Kanahara, yeah, that's what my grandmother used to say.
Mine too.
Right? Yeah. So, but I mean, we need to be ready, right? We need to be ready for that next time that this happens. You can forgive what's happened to some of the missteps they've taken, because I don't think anybody in my mom's generation or my generation has ever experienced anything like this before.
No.
But they need to be set up if this happens again, with some way to knock it out a little quicker than what's happened recently.
Yeah. I mean, we learned some lessons.
Yeah,
There are things that
mhm.
work. Wearing a mask
Mhm.
works, and it took us a long time to get acclimated. I remember how awkward we were at the beginning, people bumping elbows and being like, is this how I shake? Like we acclimated. Maybe not all of us have acclimated. If you watch what's going on, I feel like some of us have acclimated.
Well, some people want to deny some of the facts, which I guess is their prerogative, but it's unfortunate.
Yeah, but I mean, I think there will be really interesting studies about the way that different states engaged and the way different countries engaged and what worked and what didn't work. And then also on the rebound from this, educationally, what works, health-wise, what works. I mean, there's going to be, and I think people who have long COVID, like I think there's going to be health repercussions that we're not anticipating yet. And so, in some senses, we started this conversation thinking about how we see the light at the end of the tunnel. And, oh, Rebecca, how are you planning now that this is almost behind us? Like, we are not.
No, I get that. But the brush fire is somewhat put out. Now we have to, like I said, you have to plan for the future. So planning for the future means, okay, what happens if this happens again? Yeah.
So, what you're reminding me of, so another thing that we do at the foundation is emergency recovery from hurricanes. And I think often then as well, it's like the month after a hurricane, everybody's paying attention. There's a lot of resources that come in, and there's very obvious things like houses that have been devastated and things in the middle of streets. But the rebuild from a hurricane takes 1.5 years. Because for a huge portion of the population that has less than a couple $100s in savings, when you're out of work for 2 weeks, 3 weeks because of a hurricane, it is financially devastating to you. And there's a huge portion of our population that faces that. And so the kind of silent rebuild that's happening, it usually takes 1.5 years. And so I wonder the same here for COVID. The fire has been put out. How long is the tail?
Okay, so this was my observation versus, because somebody said, well, COVID's just like another hurricane. I said, I'm not 100% sure that's right, because with a hurricane, it seems like neighbor, next to neighbor, they all got out on the street. They are all helping each other. They're all, cutting down the trees, or it was the community came together with the couple of hurricanes I've gone through. With COVID, you couldn't come together, right? You had to just stay in your own place. Basically, you could talk on the cell phone, but you didn't want to intermingle with your neighbors. So it was almost like an isolation.
Yeah, that's
which
interesting.
Has a different psychological effect, because you really couldn't, with a hurricane, you pretty much could commiserate, right?
Right.
You have the ability to commiserate with your neighbors and really help out. There was no real commiseration that occurred. Like, everybody was going through the same thing. So I get it. But there was no real commiseration or dialogue or, touchy-feely type thing with COVID, which society needs. That's why I hate to see like children schooling from home, because they really need to be with other classmates.
Yeah. And the affection that's lost, even if you are in a classroom, but you can't touch each other, and you can't, like that, people need that affection. And you're right. I think neighbors that normally would be out in the streets cooking with each other in the face of the, are we doing that? I will say I did see a lot of that this year. Kind of emergency support and people saving.
Oh, emergency support, they've been great.
But the human connection for many of us wasn't there this past year. That, I think that was like really a silent pain of this year. And the Zoom connection, even talking to you through this glass, we've lost, because you can't pick up on people's facial cues the same way.
Oh, I interviewed somebody on I did the show once, and they were on Zoom, and I said, I'll never do it again. Ever, ever, ever.
The flow is lost, because I can hear you inhale. So I know when you want to, but but in a really healthy way for conversations, we lose the intimacy of relationships through a screen, and you don't realize you're losing it. And also, we're staring at ourselves all day, which is probably really unhealthy.
I'm reading. I love to read, but I mean, sitting on a phone reading 24 hours is not good.
It's not good for our sleep either.
So let's talk about Racial Equity Fund.
Yeah. So that was another major initiative this year, but I will say it's shifted for us from an initiative to a way of being. So as the country was absorbing the shock of some really serious racial inequities this past year, and we launched that fund, I started to look to see, like, how does philanthropic, like, what is the inequity within the philanthropic community? And what we saw was that foundations, when they give out resources, the vast majority of the money is flowing to organizations that are led by white people. And so I think the stat that blew my mind the most was 0.6, so less than 1%, 0.6% of foundation dollars are going to organizations led by Black women. How is that happening?
Okay, so let's kind of let me digest that for a second. Okay, what percentage of foundations are actually run by African American women? Very few, but nonprofits. Yeah, nonprofits that are on the receiving end. So on ours, far more than 1%. Far more than 1%. So is it that there's not a lot that are being run by African American women, or is it that there are, but they're being denied because they're African American women? So there's a couple problems in there. The first is like proximity to money. Who has, how do nonprofits often get their resources? So they might have a board member who has a relationship with someone who might get funding and they can help bring resources in, or, other ways to kind of get seen by those who are investing. And so I'd say like there's disproportionate access and proximity to people in power to give money for the African-American led organizations. And there's also, who is finding out that there's even an application? And then also within the screening process, what are we looking for? What do we value? So we value things like having a theory of change or a strategic plan or a website or a board of people that I recognize. What we haven't been valuing as much is lived experience in the community where you're investing. And so, one of the things we started asking ourselves is like, let's look at the money we give out over here at the Miami Foundation. And what percentage of the applications coming into us are from leaders of color? And then what percentage of our dollars going out? And what we saw was there was a breakdown, like when we looked to see how many organizations there were, not enough of them were applying. And it was like, why aren't they applying for funds? Is it because they don't know that we exist? We don't have relationships? Is it because they think that they're not going to get investments from us? Is it because they literally don't have the capacity to apply? And the application is so unwieldy, or because we're valuing things in the application that don't speak to what they have to offer. And so as we shifted our applications this year, we had to think through, how do we do outreach to be more diverse in what comes to us? And then how do we have an application process that's really welcoming? And we saw as we did that the tables turned significantly. So was it a big dichotomy as far as that you just weren't getting to where you needed to be for the applications? Or was it that the applications weren't filled out correctly, or that they thought they'd get denied? Could you ever pinpoint? Yeah, they weren't applying. They were not applying. They were not applying. And what we saw historically for us at the Miami Foundation is when they were applying, they were more likely to get funding. More likely. Okay. But they weren't applying at the same high rates. And so the question was, why are they not applying? Is it because of our application? Is it because of our screening process? Is it because of relationships? Is it because they don't know that there's a deadline and an opportunity? And so part of this was in kind of communication and recruitment and in the design of the process to apply. Did you go back and ask them why? Oh, yeah. Okay, and what did they say? So we heard a bunch of things. So for a lot of folks, it was like, I did not know you were here. I did not know that, like same as you. It's like, oh, I've been here for, I know. I mean, you guys need a better PR firm. But also, nonprofits, they need access to information about who can fund them. And so, making sure that it is really easy and simple for organizations to find out, like, where can I go to get money? They want to know. So part of this is a communication effort. And then for some organizations that were aware of us, they looked to see who got funding in the past and just thought like maybe this wasn't, like, they weren't going to be likely to get funded. And so they either opted out or they looked at the application and were intimidated or thought that it was not going to be successful. And so they didn't apply. Did they think that the Miami Foundation gave money out to organizations that they didn't necessarily fit in that bucket? Possibly. I
mean, we heard
Yeah.
a lot. We interviewed
Yeah.
hundreds of people.
Yeah, because that's fascinating actually to me, because usually you think that if you need money, you go across the board and go, okay, who can I go to?
Yeah.
You know, now if you don't know they're there, I understand that. But if you know they're there and say, I don't think so,
Right.
you know, that's a different problem altogether.
But you know, it's interesting because we did that nonprofit recovery effort where we gave those hundreds of grants out. Part of that process was building relationships with all these new organizations. And so we saw this year when we opened applications again, there was a relationship there and it was smoother, it was easier. People are less intimidated to apply because I know somebody there. And so it's part of our work as a foundation is to know who's doing the work and for us to have a deep connection with all the folks on the other end.
Cool. Very cool. So we gotta finalize it, but do you want to tell everybody out there in the world if they want to donate or if they want to contribute or if they want to volunteer or anything, how you can be reached or how the Miami Foundation can be reached?
You are very kind. So Miami Foundation, our website is miamifoundation.org. And you can, when you go on there, you can learn all about the different efforts, Racial Equity Fund and this Miami Connected effort and all the other initiatives that we have in the community. And so I hope people will go on and get engaged.
And if you want to write a check, they are more than happy to take your donation.
Your money. We will help you to invest in the community.
And they work out of downtown Miami?
Well, right now we work from home.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah.
Where's the rest of your staff work from? Home too?
Everyone is working safely from home right now. But we are right across from where that Bright Line station is downtown.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you very much for coming to speak with me today. I appreciate it.
It is a pleasure.
And thank you to Yolanda for introducing me to you.
Yes, thank you, Yolanda.
It's been fun. You should come back.
I'm here. I'm in.
You're in?
This is really delightful.
Oh, this is fun. Anyway, thanks for everybody who's watched. Please post and share. Let's get the word out. Let's let everybody know that there is a Miami Foundation that is out there and doing great work and helping the residents of Miami-Dade County. So thank you very much. We'll see you next week. Next week, we'll probably be talking about all things Palmetto Bay. So thanks for joining us today.